Hello, this is David Sloan Wilson for Evolution, This View of Life, the magazine that approaches anything and everything from an evolutionary perspective. I am now conducting my second interview with Mark Van Vugt. Hello, Mark.
Hi, David.
Who the social psychologist who is integrating his field with evolutionary science. The first interview was centered around his book, which is naturally selected, The Evolutionary Science of Leadership, and on the topic of leadership. And this interview, I want to broaden the scope and talk more generally about a broad scientific discipline such as social psychology, how it developed, and why integration is necessary. How is it possible for a big chunk of human behavior to be studied by smart people for decades, and yet not from an evolutionary perspective? And what does it mean to add the evolutionary perspective? So with that introduction, Mark, maybe you could just recount your own experience and
Right.
your thoughts on this topic.
All right. Well, I mean, I started off as a sort of classically trained social psychologist, and that discipline is sort of marked by a sort of strong focus on experimentation, lab work, if you like. And that discipline, I think, is, I mean, it's very good methodologically, despite some recent fraud cases, I think, but it's methodologically very sound. We're very well trained to actually do the research, collect the data, and develop theories. The only problem with the discipline, as far as I was concerned, was that it has evolved, if you like, quite solitary or singular, if you like, where it sort of was built up of all these mini theories or mini phenomenon without being connected to what we know from other fields. I mean, take one example. It's what you've worked on, David, as well. Groupthink. So groupthink has sort of developed really in isolation. Clinical psychologists, social psychologists have been studying the symptoms of groupthink and how bad it was and all that sort. And at some point, I thought, hang on. I mean, groups should be quite good decision makers. I mean, we make all those decisions in groups. That's what social psychologists are
Yeah,
about. But
that's a
we
yeah.
we
Let
we
me emphasize that because I mean that's such a great example, and I've written on this myself
right.
in addition to you. But such a great example of research program begins typically on the strength of a single person or one research group, basically just kind of starts it up, and it's
Yeah.
contagious, and then it leads to this idea that groups are kind of intrinsically bad as decision-making units. It's at that
Right.
point that someone with just an ounce of evolutionary thinking, just an ounce
Exactly.
is all that's required, is to say, wait a minute, how can this
Yes.
be? We've been
Yes.
living in groups for eons, and we suck when it comes to decision making.
Right.
So anyhow, continue.
Yes, no, I think so that's really a good example of where I think the field of social psychology could benefit. And so I think the emphasis really has been in social psychology on these sort of phenomenon and coming up with ever more surprising hypotheses for very surprising results that really could be only obtained in one particular lab. And so I was quite dissatisfied with that field for a while, but luckily I had the great benefit of actually working on social dilemmas, the social psychology of social dilemmas. I was doing my PhD on transport decisions. When would people take the car? When would they take the train? How would it depend on what other people in the dilemma were doing? And so, for me, it was a sort of a natural bridge to look at what game theorists had come up with, the work by Axelrod, Frank, and all those other folks. And that's how I sort of slowly became aware that there were these other fields out there who'd also written about social interdependence,
And
conflicts of
let me
interests.
just insert your reference to Frank is Bob Frank, Robert Frank, the
Right,
economist at Cornell, which I also interviewed just a few days ago for his new
right.
book, The Darwin Economy. So you can see that on the magazine. Continue.
Right, and so um, uh, and so for me it was sort of easier than most of my social psychologist colleagues to read up on the literature on the evolution of cooperation, for example. And there I thought, wow, look at all these ants; they cooperate with one another. Look at the hawks and doves games. Is that a nice way to model these social interactions? And so I thought, maybe I should really be focusing on the more fundamental questions rather than the mini phenomena that are being studied in the field of social psychology. So what we're doing with, well, now it's a considerable group of people within the field of social psychology, is we're evolutionizing social psychology. And that means that what we're actually doing is sort of placing the findings of ourselves and our colleagues within a larger framework. And that sometimes means that we have to really reconsider the foundations of some of these theories, such as with groupthink. And you think, well, maybe the default is, well, groups are good decision makers. Let's see where it goes wrong, and let's see how can we make them even more effective. And that sometimes requires a whole sort of new framing of the field. And the same is happening at the moment, I think, with the priming effects. I mean, there's been a lot of social psychologists who build their careers on automaticity and priming. And so the question really is, well, what are you doing when you prime people with I don't know, an attractive woman or something like that, or when you give people a picture of a Coca-Cola bottle? What are you invoking? What are you eliciting? One prime is not just another prime. It's about content and context.
Yeah. So what kind of pushback do you get from some of your colleagues? As you say, this is not, I mean, you're not alone in this at all. And I mean, the trend is all in the direction of evolutionizing social psychology and every other human-related field. But there's also pushback. There's people that kind of don't get
Right.
it. And
Yes.
how would you diagnose your colleagues that just don't really get it?
Yes, well, I mean, at a certain level, I mean, they're pragmatists. So if they can see that it works, that it generates good hypotheses, that the data are strong, that you get it into the good journals, then I mean, they are easily persuaded by success, if you like. But